Hello, my name is Andrew Silva, and this is my presentation on the environmental impact of the Formosa steel plant disaster of 2016. Please excuse some of my pronunciations, they may be a little off. This isn't my first language. All right. I'm going to be going over multiple areas that were affected, or multiple provinces, four of them, and these are the first two, Quang Binh and Ha Tinh. Throughout you're gonna see that throughout all four, they all do have something in common, which is that their economies mostly rely on fishing and agriculture, except for the spot that the steel plant was actually located. Fun fact, fishing and agriculture only make up 35% of Hattin, the place where the steel plant was located, their GDP, their gross domestic product. So there's more leaning towards industrial growth and industrial means of earning money, but other places around them aren't so fortunate and earn their income through things like natural attractions such as national parks. There's a picture of one right here. Um, so yeah. These are two more provinces. They, as you can see, that they have the same connection from the first two, as they're economically driven by things such as tourism and fishing and agriculture. But these two are more leaning towards relying on um, tourism and people seeing landmarks, like they want to see landmarks. These two pictures are from in the Imperial City, which is actually a UNESCO site. And a UNESCO site is basically a World Heritage Center that is protected under like the world government under an international treaty. And so, yeah, these two pictures are a piece of land that are protected by the whole world, and people want to go see them. But yeah, the DMZ is actually a war site that it was basically a buffer zone between North and South Vietnam when they were at odds with each other in the 1900s. So it served as like a border kind of for a little bit, but now it's sort of just like a landmark. And there's also these things called the Vin Moc tunnels, which were some would say that it's also like part of the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, but they used to use these to take cover from or take shelter from bombings that were occurring at the time. All right. So this is the timeline that I had put together. It's not as condensed as I make it out to be, obviously. There's only like 6 points here, but um these are the most influential like time markers in my opinion. As you can see, it starts off with the mass fish deaths being reported along the coast of Hattin, actually, because that's the area closest um, to the steel plant. That's where it is. And from there on, people had taken notice and they started protesting, and they were basically asking the government, like, what's wrong? And the government didn't know at first until the Formosa steel plant came forward and they agreed to pay the government for the damage they caused. These are the causes of the disaster, and while I think that while it may be easy to blame corporate greed for this kind of issue, um, there were also talks that the Vietnamese government themselves are actually pushing like their own country and these corporations to start being more industrial. They were looking for more of a economic like boost, basically. And um, Formosa dumping as much toxic waste as they did was probably due to the catalyst of them being told to, work harder and make more. Um, Formosa actually didn't disclose what they had, or what chemicals and agents were in their own toxic waste, and the government themselves they were aware they were given notice by the Formosa steel plant themselves, but they had refused to share that information with people who were being treated, because people had gotten sick from all of the toxic waste that was in the ocean and the fish that they had possibly consumed. Um, yeah, but that was it was really strange that the government themselves had actually not, you know, taken the side of the citizens in that case. This is the immediate impact that it had on communities, human wise, I would say. Human wise, the incident had led to a decline in livelihood for many, as there were a lot of people's jobs that relied on the resources from the ocean, such as it could be a factor of things, such as like the water or the marine life that lived there, because people fish, obviously, and they use those fish to make other sorts of dishes or products. And since they were contaminated with the chemicals from the Formosa plants, from the Formosa steel plant, they were unable to be used and so forth. People had lost a lot of money and their own methods of making money due to this. Um, People had also gotten sick, or not to forget that people had gotten sick because of the contamination, and they would feel things such as rashes and digestive issues. Um, but this had led to an outcry from the communities to hold protests. Surprisingly, though, these were led by, I think it was Catholic and Christian groups. I'm not sure the connection there, but apparently they were very influential. So, yeah, they had gotten the government to listen to them. Regarding the response and cleanup efforts, the government had actually fined Formosa Steel Factory for, the environmental damage that they caused, and they had issued apologies, but apologies don't do much to people who have, had their livelihoods like kind of ruined. Um, they can't really pay for things with a sorry. And regarding the accountability that Formosa steel plant had themselves, they had basically just said that that's our fault and we're sorry. And they had promised to basically make sure it never happens again and that they would work towards helping to clean up the mess that they made. But as far as I can tell through the research I'd done, they hadn't really looked at they hadn't really done anything directly. They basically just paid for the cleanup to start, but they hadn't really overlooked any major projects. The environmental impact of the disaster had actually been massive, seeing as more than 100 tons of dead fish had, they'd washed up on the beach. Like 100 tons of dead fish. That is so many fish. So there was definitely a huge loss of biodiversity, and there were coral reefs along many of the coasts that were affected. And coral reefs themselves are actually keystone species, and they provide for other sea life. And if they're not there, the rest suffer, and the rest are suffering anyway. So if the amount of coral reef had been on decline because of this situation, the rest of the environment would take a while to recover. Um, Biodiversity loss is a big factor, seeing as a bunch of different types of species of fish were affected. And that is actually talked about in, I think it's our seventh module, or we had readings in that seventh module. I don't know the chapter. I think it would be like 6 point something. And environmental toxicology is also brought up, which was mentioned in our module 8 reading, where we went over eutrophication and how different types of chemicals can seep into the things of everyday use, and they could affect us, such as things like carcinogens being in maybe like a, I don't know, like a tire or something. And um food chain and cascading of species is also brought up in module 3, because if one species dies out and there's nothing else that can, that only consumes that species, the rest of the environment will also die out according to it. And biomagnification, I'm pretty sure that goes hand in hand with environmental toxicology, which was in module 8, like I said before. But that was just an explanation of how chemicals can, basically compile as it goes down, like the food chain. This is an overlook at the overall damage that had happened due to the disaster. And I would say that it was hardest on those who, rely on fishing and farming near the area because their fish had been contaminated and they couldn't sell or even eat the fish themselves without risk of getting sick because of all the chemicals in the water. And they couldn't really use the water for things such as farming or whatever anyway because it had been contaminated in the same way that they couldn't use the fish. So anything grown would probably not be adequate or, if anything could grow at all. And I would say that the short-term effects were, people losing their jobs and livelihood for a while, and people just, feeling sick due to the fish being, poisoned. And I would think that the long-term effects are the environmental aspect of it, because the environment has to take a while to recover itself because of the damages that were done. And the trust that the Vietnamese people have in their own government, seeing as it was their oversight that had allowed something like this to happen to them. Um, so that would be like another downside of the event. Look, these are the lessons learned from the Formosa steel plant disaster. That is a mouthful. I should have found a way to shorten that. I've been saying that, or I've been having issues re-saying it in this presentation itself. It's probably going to be a pain to edit and, fix or go over and re-record. But yeah, these are the lessons learned from that event. And it was basically the government going over and saying, we want to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So they were basically breaking down on other corporations and businesses that would, you know, have an opportunity to do something like this. So they had made it so that they were more overlooked by the government, basically. Like they had an active eye on them, so now they couldn't just, you know, get rid of their waste by dumping it in the ocean. And a big example of this is actually the mandatory environmental impact assessments, which actually they had implemented it right after the incident, actually. So you could say that it was a big catalyst for it. The new change had made it so that companies had to, basically say that they knew how much, or that they know how much what they're doing could impact the environment, and that they have a method of control in order to minimize their own pollution done to the environment. So they had to show that, or the companies and businesses had to show to the government that, hey, we know what we're doing and we can't, and we have a way to fix and remediate if something were to happen. Um, Regarding community awareness, uh, the government had found out that the people of Vietnam, they weren't too keen on their environment being destroyed and tons of fish dying. And it had shown them that they need to listen to their people better, and that they should be looking at they should be looking towards the Formosa steel plant disaster as a sign, or basically like what's the word for it? I would say not like a martyr, but like a basically an example of like what we need to improve on ourselves. Because this had only happened because of oversight on what they had been doing. These are my references. I have quite a few of them. Some of these are just for pictures. Um, I tried not to use Wikipedia as much because, people tend to say that Wikipedia itself as a resource isn't that, useful. Looking back on it, I think I should have chosen a different a different event, because it was a challenge to find information on the kinds of things, or based on the prompt or information regarding, because most of the information was, I would get directed to pages that were in Vietnamese, or so I couldn't read any of it. One last slide to thank you for listening to the end, and I just wanted to end this off on a good note because I wanted to thank you for your patience also because I have been stuttering through this. I just haven't recorded anything, and I feel a little nervous. I can't really shake it. I am open to any thoughts you may have had about my presentation and anything that maybe you think that you could tell me to keep in mind for next time I have to do something like this. Maybe any improvements I can make. I would love to hear it. Thank you, and thank you for listening.